Hey everyone, Kimberly from Peas on Moss and the All-Purpose Cake Company, Val and Ivy. We're just doing a quick episode to talk about All-Purpose Cake and check out the new specialties coming. So we are in Bellevue at the Wildflour Gluten-free Baking Company Bake Shop, where All-Purpose does their baking. And so you ladies are not full-time bakers, so
No.
it is after hours right now.
Yeah.
And so tell us about All-Purpose and the kind of the birth of the brand, and happy birthday for getting to your first year.
Yes.
Oh yes, yeah, for sure. So the idea came about when I had to do a food detox because of my migraine. So I had a neurologist that I was seeing, and he said I need to detox from anything with gluten, anything with dairy, and anything with refined sugar. And because of my sweet tooth, I realized there was nothing I could eat. And by a month into the detox, I was craving sweet things. So I took a recipe that my mom has always made, and I re-engineered it to be gluten-free, sugar-free, dairy-free.
Wow.
And when I finalized on the recipe, I reached out to Evie, who I had worked with.
Yes.
And Evie can tell her story of your daughter, and why this is like close to home to her.
So we had coffee. We always have coffee, right? So we called it our work lunch. And Val said, hey, I have this idea of taking my mom's recipe, which is a traditional Filipino dessert. I've already figured out a way to make it gluten-free, dairy-free, and sugar-free. Do you bake?
And I need someone to bake my cake.
And I said, yes, I bake, right? Like I make cookies and I make brownies, but man, this is like baking like nobody's business. Like we basically had to learn how to bake in like what, 2 months?
In 2 months. And prior to this cake, I typically don't bake. I've never been a hobby baker, so we taught ourselves to bake watching YouTube.
Yeah.
I watch every YouTube how to bake that there was.
Like I never even used a piping bag in all my baking,
Oh my
right?
word.
Like everything came out of a sheet or a loaf, but never like anything piped. So there we were practicing, YouTube, play, rewind, figuring things out. But we did. I was super on board with Val's idea because my daughter has epilepsy and she cannot have anything with gluten, dairy, or sugar. I mean, sugar is like number one. She takes sugar and within 24 hours she will have a seizure. And so it was super no-no in our house. When she turned 21, we couldn't even get her a cake. It was pretty depressing for a mom.
Yeah.
And what more for my daughter, who goes to parties and then she can't even have half the stuff that's there. So I'd have to bring our own food to parties. So the thought of coming up with a gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free dessert, I was like, I'm all in, And the rest is history.
Yep. So really what we wanted to do was have a cake which we called our inclusive cake.
Yeah.
We want a cake where people of any dietary restrictions, or if you're on a keto diet or paleo diet, could have our cake, but it's good enough for anyone who's not on any restriction. We wanted our cake to taste good for anyone, but also it needs to be fun and look good and colorful. Because what I was finding in the market, anything that was allergen friendly was lacking in color.
It was brown.
It was always brown. So I wanted our cakes to look and taste just as good as any other cakes in the market, and you wouldn't know it's allergen free.
Nice.
And I know a lot of these cakes are also using a lot of dyes. And for Val, that was a no-no.
Yeah, that's a big migraine trigger for me. Anything with like food coloring, any food coloring. So
so all of these dyes are natural.
Yep. Yeah. We are particularly sensitive to never using any food coloring in our cakes. So to get them fun and vibrant, it takes a lot of thought for us
and
on where we get those colors naturally
Like,
for
if you
fruits
look at
and
this
vegetables.
one, So the blue comes from a butterfly pea.
Flour.
Oh, love
Flour,
it.
Which
Yay.
comes from China.
Mm-hmm.
And then we should grab, we don't have our other cake here, but here's a slice.
I already ate the other part, folks, so
of our red velvet because
Yeah.
we've been eating it. And this is
Beet
beetroot
powder.
powder.
Amazing.
We also have a pink cake, and the pink, we should grab
Pitaya
one.
dragon fruit.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we really have to think creatively of how we get
Yeah.
colors from nature.
Yeah.
And I think back to sort of, how people used to dye their clothes. It was
Yeah.
all from fruit and vegetables.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
something you mentioned about thinking outside the box,
my
because you think creatively. You didn't come from food science backgrounds or even culinary backgrounds, and that could probably have presented like a big hill to climb when you were
Uh-huh.
getting started. And at the same time, you're thinking more creatively than the rest of us who, kind of gotten indoctrinated. So,
Yeah.
talk to us about some of the things that you've done that are out of the box that have worked out really well and are unique to you.
The layers of the cake. Initially, when we were baking the cakes, we were baking them in traditional baking pans.
Mm-hmm.
But when we had to think about
Mass
production, large scale, the thought of our cakes was always to develop to scale. We didn't want it to be like boutique and niche because we wanted it to be available for anybody and everybody, to have accessible cakes. Because that's one of the things I found also within the allergen-friendly market is you have to go to specialty places to find them. What we wanted is a grab-and-go, easy-to-get product. That you didn't have to pre-order it, that you didn't have to go across town to go to that specialty bakery. Like ideally, what we would love to see is have our cakes easily available for anyone
Yeah.
who needs it.
I love it.
So thinking in scale was one of the challenge. So this is where we went from big cakes to mini cakes. And then how do we make mini cakes? So we ended up using mousse molds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Because we were hand piping them originally.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But-
Or using
We were drawing them out.
thin round pans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you know how hard those are to wash.
Yeah.
And can you imagine a typical run is like 160 cakes? And you're not gonna do 160 rounds and wash 160 rounds,
No.
right? So we had to think of how we were gonna do that. And turns out with COVID and people not wanting to share food,
It worked
this
out really
turned out really well. I mean, just talking about
we didn't build it for COVID.
we
It
didn't
just
build it
turned
for
out.
COVID.
It worked out for the time that we're in.
Yeah,
And the grab and go idea.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
so easy to split too.
If you have to split, I guess.
Yes. But the other thing that is unique about our cake is because it's inherently flour free, the layers are meringue. So these are dacqua cakes. It's a French dessert, which is basically means taking egg whites.
Yeah.
They're a meringue and they're binded by nuts.
Yes.
Nice.
So
Okay.
that's what makes a traditional dacqua. Because they're meringues, they have pockets.
Yeah.
So when we sell them as a freezer item, because what happens is the icicles build inside the pockets. And when you defrost the cake, the icicles melt and they moisten the cake.
So it doesn't become a dry cake.
It doesn't become
Brilliant.
a dry cake. And so you could take half of the cake and throw it back in the freezer as long as it's in an airtight container. The cycle starts again and the crystals start to build into it. So then when you eat your leftover, as long as you allow it to thaw,
Yeah.
all the icicles will melt and it re-moisturize the cake.
Wow.
So it's this whole cycle of like typically
Yeah.
what we wanted to avoid
Was
was
a dry
a throwaway cake.
Yeah.
And
Right.
what I find in coffee shops is you always have that basket of day old.
Yeah.
So sustainability is critical to us and having as minimal waste as possible. So having a cake that you can eat many times and slice into 3s or 4s and it will still taste as good as it did from the first
Yeah.
slice.
Wow. So you started with a consumer problem, a health restriction.
Yeah.
You moved into how do I build this business by thinking at large scale 1st, and then, you know, starting with step 1, knowing already what your vision was going to look like, and then solve the problem of food waste, you know, as far as, you know, allowing the consumer to eat all of the cake on her timing, right?
Yep.
Amazing.
Well,
so tell us real quick about these cakes.
So
And
these
then I've got to
are
eat
our
these.
best-selling cakes.
Oh, they are their best-selling cakes.
This is a chocolate espresso
Hazelnut.
hazelnut cake.
So there's actually a twin story between these two
True,
cakes.
true.
When we were in R&D to launch our first new cake, we really wanted to launch with an Earl Grey cake.
Yeah.
Because we thought it was something that's not in the market. My husband's English. I'm a big tea drinker, and so is my husband. And I thought it was a cake that I see elsewhere outside the U.S., but not here. And we were challenged, and we just couldn't get the flavor right.
Yep.
So
So we ended up with this.
we ended up with coffee because we figured, well, if you
This
can't
is
get
Seattle.
tea, this is Seattle, we're gonna have to do an espresso cake.
Yes.
So this cake is actually tastes like a tiramisu
Yes.
because it's not mocha, it's like espresso.
Yeah.
The chocolate is, we use a vegan chocolate chips, pasha. So there's no sugar and there's no dairy on that chocolate too. And then the hazelnut is local to Washington.
The Holmquist Farms.
Yeah, they're based in Linden by the border, and I'm
Yeah.
Canadian, so I actually drive by their farms each time I go home and visit family. And this was the cake that I made it for my husband,
Yeah.
and he loved it. So I said to Evie, you know, my husband
This is our cake.
he doesn't like dessert. He doesn't eat dessert. He's traditionally English. He likes cheese and crackers for dessert, for after meal.
Yeah.
But he will eat this cake, so we thought, let's start with
Yeah.
that.
Brilliant.
After we launched the cake, we partnered with Steepology of Fremont,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrea and Joe, and they gave us samples of their various Earl Grey, and we settled on the Lavender Earl Grey,
Yeah.
which is a French Earl Grey, because Earl Grey is, what's tricky about Earl Grey is the wide spectrum. You can get very bergamonty and woody to very florally to very fruity. And we really need to understand like where we want it to be. And when we
And
launched,
how it fit with our nuts.
yes. And this was actually developed to be a spring Earl Grey.
Yes.
And that's why we went for a French Earl Grey.
Yeah.
So it has more of like a slightly fruity florally. So what we do is we use Steepology's Lavender Earl Grey, and we steep it, and 100% of the flavor in this cake comes from the tea.
Yeah.
There is no food extracts or food additives to get the extra flavor.
Wow.
It's just all tea.
Yeah.
And then the color, to make it pop, comes from blue butterfly pea flower,
Yeah.
which grows in China.
Yeah.
And that's really the story.
These
so
are-
this should have been
yeah.
the first cake, which ended up like the fourth.
The fourth cake. But these are our best-selling flavors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
again, this is the same hazelnut as this cake, except the hug has cacao, and that's what gives it that darker color.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Wow.
Yeah.
This
People-
is amazing.
People ask, why are the cakes not perfectly the same?
Sure.
The reason why is because they're meringues.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And meringues are sensitive to humidity.
Yeah.
So every time we bake them, they're always going to be a little bit different. But
Yeah.
all our cakes are baked by hand and they're high touch, and that's what makes them artisan
Yeah.
cakes. They're not machined, and
Yep.
they're never
And
always
fried.
going to be the same. It's just going to be what the
What
humidity
it
of
is.
that day is, would be sort of what the meringues would look like.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Well, I am so excited just to get to actually meet in person. I think this is the
Yeah.
first Instagram friendship that became a real life
Oh,
friendship.
yeah, that's
So,
right.
you know, and it's just really exciting to see where you're gonna go. I mean, starting a business in the middle of COVID,
Oh my gosh, yes.
probably not ideal. Probably not what you would have
No.
written.
Yeah,
Obviously,
no
none of
idea.
us planned that. But you have such a great vision. I love how you started, you know, again, with the solution and
Yeah.
identified the problem. You got through all of that. So
Yeah.
it's just uphill from here. But
Yeah.
also, you know, you have a good identity of the brand, and so I'm excited to just see where you'll show up in the store.
Yeah, well,
So,
keep in touch.
yeah.
We've got new things coming up all the time.
Yep.
Follow our Instagram.
Yep.
See our latest thing is TikToks.
Yeah, we're just kind of learning the world of TikTok,
Yeah.
but also we're developing a flavor every month.
Yeah.
And this is really part of our creativity, that we get to kind of spread our wings a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
It's also part of us trying to identify what the flavor palette of the market.
Yep.
Eventually, one day, we're going to hone in on what the top
Yep.
flavors are. So we're testing them every month with all
Yeah.
these new flavers that we roll out. So maybe at the end of the year, we'll have to do a voting.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a
the
great
top
idea.
flavors.
Yeah.
So, and for those who are national watchers, listeners,
Yeah.
you do ship, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we're
So,
shipping. We're getting there.
We're shipping.
We're shipping. Yeah. And that was another hurdle
Yeah.
to kind of learn
I bet.
Yes.
how to ship a frozen food product and have it
Yes.
arrive
And
intact.
a meringue at that.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
Yeah. But I think we figured it out.
We
So
figured
Nice.
it out.
that's the next new thing.
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on your Instagram for details. I'll obviously share the links to your
All right.
businesses, and yay, this is so exciting. All right,
Thanks so much.
I'm going to abandon everybody because I'm going to go eat cake.
Okay.